You ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a pleasure and a privilege for me to be standing here, to be speaking on a subject which is very close to my heart. I express my deep sense of gratitude to the President and the Secretary for having me here. And just put in context as to how this whole thing happened, it was just a small snippet of the Siachen, of something to do with Siachen, which was there on the WhatsApp. And Raju sent it over to me, and so I just mentioned, oh yes, I have served there. And that's when we got into a conversation, and he said, you must tell us as to what are the lessons you learned there. Well, I was there in the glacier in 2001. So it's almost 25 years back. But then the memories are so fresh, and all I had to do was just jiggle a little bit and go down the memory lane. And that's how I made my presentation. I've taken the liberty of just altering the title to Winning Without Excuses. Because in war, there's no place for a runner-up. You have to win. And there are no excuses. Well, with that as the backdrop, when you look at this title behind, it appears to be more like a sort of what you find when you enter any corporate office outside in the corridor. But when you're standing at a place where excuses don't survive, at an altitude of 18,000 plus feet, where the temperatures go down to minus, 50 degrees and below, where the oxygen in your lungs is less than half of what you have here at present sitting in this auditorium. Winning without excuses isn't a slogan anymore. It's the bare minimum requirement for survival. This is a place where even breathing takes an effort. And with that, when you say breathing, it also amounts to living. A place where helicopters find it difficult to fly, machines don't work, weapons jam, and the batteries fail. Anything and everything can happen. But then, you need to survive. And this is a place where the nature sets the rules. And the human resolve is the only currency that matters. But then, this presentation is not about Siachen. It's not about the glacier. This is not even about war. It's about the various, it's about the leadership under very, very trying conditions. It's about teams that continue to perform when systems collapse. It's about preparation so deep that courage becomes instinct. In my nearly 4 decades of service in the Indian Army, I've learned that in this VUCA world, this is an acronym which you're all familiar with. It's not a theoretical business school framework. It is a stark reality. Today we are going to talk about what it takes to build teams that do not just survive adversity, but scale through it. We will talk about the core leadership lessons, mission clarity, building trust, discipline in action, empowering teams, and executing relentlessly. When in my last tenure as the commandant of infantry school, one of the young officers, when we were, this topic was about, glaciated warfare, he asked me, who's the biggest enemy in the glacier? Only one word I had for that: complacency. Because once, discipline drops even for a moment, the glacier punishes you instantly. Before I proceed further, I would just like to give you a very brief history about this whole, what the Siachen Glacier is all about, so that you understand when I speak about the lessons being learned, you are able to fathom the type of conditions or the type of, terrain in which we were operating. Just a small snippet of the glacier.
The old-style coverage. This is one of the most hostile regions on Earth. Snaking through the tower gates is a 78-kilometer long Siachen Glacier. It's a frontier like no other in the world. Guarding demands constant innovation. The Siachen Glacier is at 12,000 feet above sea level. But this is just carabiners, winches, gloves. The men are ready to take on the world's hardest battlefield. Over the next few months, these men will face more than one enemy. Extreme altitude, frigid temperature, oxygen-starved atmosphere, avalanches, snowstorms, and enemy fire. Atop a lonely crag, on a windy mountain outpost, an Indian soldier stands guard, so that his countrymen may flourish in peace.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Now, I'll briefly just, tell you about what this thing is all about. You look at this landscape. Okay? This is the Soltoro Ridge in the Karakoram Range. It's often called the third pole. In this terrain, your physical body is constantly under siege. The mind plays tricks on you. The sheer isolation can break even the strongest of men. Early in my career as a second in command of one of the finest units of the Indian Army, I realized a fundamental truth about human performance. You cannot conquer Siachen. You have to just endure it. And that's true, I feel, of all mountains. Even if you have the finest soldiers under your command, to endure it, an organization has to undergo transformation. Why I say so? Because this type of terrain is very unique. The glaciated terrain is something which is which is only one of its kind. And that's the reason why it's called the highest battlefield. It's called a very unique battlefield. And this is one place where some of us get only one opportunity to go and serve. We talk about performance teams in the corporate world. But on the glacier, transformation means moving from prepared minds to victory for the nation. It requires a shift where personal comfort always takes a backseat to the mission. Why? Because out there, if you lose your footing, or if your teammate loses his focus even for a single second, the glacier doesn't give you a second chance. High performance here is not about individual brilliance, it's about an unbroken chain of brotherhood. Now, to truly understand the leadership lessons, you must understand the geography. Look at the map. There's a 70-kilometer long ridge of ice. The width varies from 4 to 6 kilometers, and it lies between the Soltoro Ridge in the west and the Karakoram Range in the east. When you just go back to history, the Karachi Agreement of 1949, And thereafter, you had the Shimla Agreement of 1972. And after the Karachi Agreement, something called as the ceasefire line came about. Basically in, the borders of Punjab and J&K. And after the Shimla Agreement, it was called the line of control. But both of them stopped here in this NJ 9842. Now, thereafter, it said that the boundary or the border between both the countries will be thence northwards. Why? Because nobody ever believed that anybody can go and fight in that area or even go and live in that area. And as far as the Pakistan was concerned, they felt that this NJ 9842 should link up with the Karakoram Pass, that is go northeast. Whereas our perception is it should follow the watershed, that is along the Soltoro Ridge. So that laid the basis for this type of conflict happening in this particular place. But geography also dictates strategy. This piece of ice, it's also a wedge. If you look at it, this is a wedge between the area illegally ceded to China by Pakistan in 1963 called the Shaktgam Valley and the Gilgit-Baltistan, which is in POJK. So the importance of this high ground need not be stressed further. I'm sure you understand. So, and in always military terms, anybody who holds the high ground, especially in mountains, he commands the area around it. And that's the reason we have to hold this high ground at any cost. Okay, a little bit on the historical perspective. As I mentioned earlier, see what happened was in the 70s, Pakistan started giving permission for a number of mountaineering expeditions to be done on the glacier. If you look at it on the Gilgit-Baltistan side, they are very close to the passes. It was only in 78 that the Indian Army launched an expedition there, which was by the late Colonel Narendra Kumar, also called as Bull Kumar. And somehow in 1983, intelligence sources revealed that Pakistan was planning to occupy this area. April 13, 1984, that's when we preempted them. We went and occupied all the passes, primarily Siala and Bilafondla, the main passes leading onto the glacier. Please remember, as far as they are concerned, they are much, much closer to these passes than what we are. So there was no option but for a battalion of 4 Kumar to be heli-dropped there, and thereafter this battle for the passes has been going on, and we've stood our ground. In 1987, I'm sure all of you would be aware about the operation that took place wherein this post called Bana, which was one only post which was on the ridge line which was held by Pakistan, was captured by us, by Subedar Bana Singh, for which he was awarded a Paramveer Chakra. And that's the reason this post, otherwise called a scared post, is now called the Bana post. And now we hold the Soltoro Ridge. They've tried umpteen number of times to dislodge us from there, but they have failed. Yes, it meant decades of sacrifice, but then it had to be done. If you are interested, there is this book on Siachen conflict, Looking Beyond Himalayas, by Major General Arun Lal. And also there's another book called Siachen Conflict Without an End by Lieutenant General Raghavan. It's very interesting. It gives you the entire, the chronology of events and the reason as to why we need to occupy this piece of, somebody says a frozen battlefield, somebody says, because they say nothing grows here. Because Siachen, actually, if you look at it, what does it mean? Sia means wild rose. Chen means abundance of it. But then, frankly, let me tell you, I didn't see a single rose. Okay. Now let's break down the transformation, what I spoke about, how it actually happens. We have identified 6 distinct pillars, as you can see on the slide, that act as a force multiplier when the environment is hostile. The first, you must establish trust before turbulence hits you. You don't build a team when the crisis arrives. You build it in the quiet moments of preparation. Second, discipline is what creates agility. It sounds like a paradox, but we'll explore how structure actually enables speed a little later. Third, we build leaders, not dependencies. If a team relies solely on one commander, that team is fragile. Fourth, we look at multipliers at scale. Fifth, we understand that logistics wins more battles than brilliance. And finally, culture is the ultimate force multiplier. When you have these 6 pillars, you just don't face challenges, you outlast them. Now, let's look at the twin challenge framework. Basically, human psychology, equipment, isolation, logistics, tactics. Let's talk about who are the actual adversaries in the glacier? Yes, that is the enemy across the AGPL. But your primary relentless enemy is nature itself. Psychologically, the human body is not meant to exist at this height, at 20,000 and beyond. There are this high altitude diseases like HACO, basically pulmonary edema or cerebral edema, where water in the lungs or water in your brains, which can prove to be fatal. Your, appetite drops, you lose a lot of weight, sleep is an absolute, it's very difficult to sleep there, and it's more of a luxury than anything else. Your equipment betrays you, your weapons, the lubricants freeze. There are so many challenges that comes up. The batteries that generally last for 8 hours, they don't even last for 20 minutes there. And, the metal becomes so brittle that sometimes it just breaks. Then comes the psychological toll, which is most difficult thing to overcome. That's isolation. You're confined to either a fiberglass hut or an ice cave with the same 4 or 5 people for weeks on end. Far away from any sort of habitation, far away in the white wilderness, surrounded by nothing but just by a, blinding white landscape. This, the strategic takeaway for a corporate leader here is stark. If you look at it, they just don't face the enemy, they outlast nature. In business, your competition is one thing, but the market environment, the regulatory shifts, the economic overturns, that is the nature you need to outlast. I wanted to speak about training, and this was just a small snippet of the Siachen Battle School, where the training is done prior to your induction into the glacier. Now, how do you prepare a human being to survive and fight in an environment that's actually, trying to kill him? And that's the answer. Every single soldier, regardless of rank, whether a raw recruit or a senior commander, he must go through this rigorous training before even stepping onto the glacier. We train them in icecraft and glacier management. They learn how to survive. They learn habitat management, avalanche awareness, and even rescue. They learn how to walk, how to cross crevices, in a, how to, walk roped up in a crevices-ridden terrain. They are trained in, they learn to survive in the ice cave if they are cut off, and how to survive if you, get into a blizzard. And why ice caves? Because that is where, whenever firing takes place, you have to move into an ice cave. That's the only way you can survive. And when I say firing, it is the artillery shells that land. The philosophy of the battle school is simple. It just says, training saves lives. See how apt it is. We do not send people to the front lines hoping they will adapt. We condition them so thoroughly that adaptation, it becomes a sort of an instinct. In your organizations, when you launch a new project or probably enter a volatile market, what is your battle school? Are you training your people to survive the worst case scenario? Or are you just giving them a theoretical briefing? This brings us to the core pivot of our discussion today. Preparation. Preparation is the foundation, but preparation without leadership is just static. We understand the terrain, we know the history, we accept the challenges, and we train to overcome them. But now, we must lead. How do you lead when the stakes are this high? We do it by anchoring ourselves to 5 timeless leadership lessons. Purpose over comfort, trust before turbulence, structure that enables speed, multipliers at scale, and sustainability beats heroics. Now let's examine, these through the lens of the battlefield. The modern corporate world, is, because I've had a little exposure in my last 2 years, they're obsessed with this word of motivation. A lot of consultants are hired, engagement surveys done, design beautiful workspaces, cafeterias, entertainment and what have you, all to keep people motivated. But motivation is actually, if you look at it, is an emotional state. It fluctuates. When a soldier is cold, sleep deprived and shivering at 3 a.m., motivation evaporates. But what survives? What stands? It's the purpose, the why. So on the glacier, we don't talk about motivation, we talk about mission before motivation. Every soldier here has absolute mission clarity. He knows what we are trying to achieve. He's got total role clarity. He understands what is expected of him. He knows what is mutual dependence. He knows that he can depend on someone and somebody else is dependent on him. And the leadership lesson as to how it's so important to be relevant. When a soldier is standing guard with his buddy is sleeping, he knows that he can't fall off, he just cannot go off to sleep because the life of his buddy all depends on him. That is the type of, the mutual dependence that exists. And that is something which is ingrained, which is not taught. Same way, when volatility hits your business, I feel you should not try to motivate your team just, by giving them, perks and all that. Anchoring them to a clear, unshakable purpose is what ensures commitment and survives when motivation fails. This is just a picture of, if you look at it, there's a place called Sonam where there's an FGH which has been covered by snow. To enter it, you just have this small, sort of a small hole. Now, it's the job of the soldier, whoever is on duty, to ensure that he keeps shoveling out the snow, lest the people inside don't get caught inside. And he does it relentlessly till such time he is relieved. And when I was mentioning about ice caves, this is where you need to take shelter. and this is what you create, or for you to be safe from enemy shelling. Now, how do you build trust before crisis arrives? Modern organizations, quite often they confuse flexibility with, one second. Sorry. There's a beautiful, profound truth etched into the operational reality of the glacier. Nobody enters the glacier because they trust the weather. They enter it because they trust each other. You cannot assemble trust during a crisis. It must exist in the marrow of your organization. Especially in high-stakes environment, trust is built on a very, very specific equation. Shared understanding multiplied by predictable character multiplied by consistent actions is what gets you trust. Let me give you a practical example. When a patrol is moving across across on the glacier, they are all roped up. They are all linked to a single rope. Why? Because the moment any one of them goes into a crevice, the person front or behind him just digs in his heel and holds on, ensuring that that person doesn't go in further deep. Irrespective, that is the type of understanding they have within the team. And straight away, that's how you ensure that, you come back as a team. It's all for one, one for all. Same way, if I may ask you, in your corporate teams, do your people trust each other's execution when the markets get turbulent? Or are they waiting to see which way the wind blows before supporting their teammates? Well, that is something which you need to ask yourself. We'll highlight this a little further when I'm talking of trust. You see, casualty evacuation is such an important thing because every soldier knows that his leadership will ensure that he comes out from there safe. Now, yes, over a period of extended time, some of them may develop this so-called high altitude diseases, which are sometimes very fatal. But he knows very well that his mates, that his leadership will ensure that he gets out from there. If you look at it, it's not that easy. Even moving a person who's sick, moving him from the place where he's there up to the helipad itself is a humongous effort. And thereafter, you see the ecosystem that is existing. The helicopters take off from the base, and I'll just show you a small clip to show you as to how the helicopters also take off from the base, and despite the inclement weather, and you all know that in glacier the weather can turn foul any time, but they have that type of determination. They're risking their own lives. They come to save one life. And I must tell you also about this, that, we have something called as a hypo chamber. When somebody gets, water in the lungs or whatever, he's put into this chamber basically to reduce the pressure. The only sort of remedy for such type of disease is to moving a person down to a lower altitude. Now this hypo chamber is, when a person is put into that, he cannot sleep. He has to be kept awake. So there is a sort of a communication system. And somebody has to keep speaking to him. There have been days when when a western disturbance strikes, for 7 days, 14 days, the weather is absolutely bad. No choppers can fly. No movement can take place. But how do you keep him alive? That is where the type of camaraderie comes into play. That's where leadership comes into play. Wherein you keep speaking to him day in and day out and ensure he doesn't sleep. But then, yes, there have been instances when, for whatever reason, this person, he didn't survive. But finally, when we had to, when the mortal remains had to be sent down, it took us at least 3 more days for the weather to clear and for the choppers to come in. But then, when the mortal remains were taken to the helipad is such a small, it's just a 10 by 10 sort of a small place. And they realized that they couldn't put the cheetah is a very small one, so they couldn't, and after a period of time, the body also stiffens up. So they've not been able to put the body inside. So what happens? Here comes this youngster, a young soldier. What he does, and this is all done in, I would say in split seconds. He just takes a sort of a picket, he just breaks the legs and puts the body inside. He does it out of love. He wants the mortal remains to go back. And he doesn't want to leave anyone behind. That is the essence of trust. Now, you see, modern organizations often they confuse flexibility with freedom and structures with, rigidity. They think that to be agile, you must throw away rules. Military operations teach us, exactly the opposite. Structure actually enables speed. This is what we call the paradox of discipline. The more disciplined the preparation, the more adaptive the execution. The SOPs, what we have a lot of SOPs in the army. They're not designed to restrict your mind. They're designed to reduce friction and hesitation. When a crisis hits, you don't want your team debating basic processes. You want those processes to be so deeply ingrained that it becomes sort of, a muscle memory. It frees up the intellectual capacity to handle the unexpected variable. And that's where mental mobility comes into play in a big way. Look at the images here. The operational briefing in an ice tent. Every map marker, every communication protocol, every backup frequency is standardized. Because the structure is clear, our junior leaders have the freedom to act decisively. Discipline is not a constraint. It's a force multiplier that creates true tactical freedom. The next, yesterday's leaders, they had all the answers. They sat at the top of a pyramid, giving commands and controlling information. But in today's world, in this fast-moving, complex environment, that model is actually a recipe for disaster. If decisions stop when the leader stops, leadership has already failed. Large-scale operations teach us a brutal truth. We cannot afford to scale leaders, we must scale capability. And leadership is no longer about command and control. It's about enabling, empowering, and multiplying. When a small team is deployed in a forward observation post, cut off from the main base due to weather for days and also due to terrain, the young Havaldar or the JCO on the spot, he is the commander. He cannot wait for, somebody from, elsewhere trying to give him orders, or he cannot seek orders from them or try to. He has to take a decision. And that, that is why it is said that initiative moves downwards. Accountability moves upwards. And confidence moves sideways. And especially in such an environment, everybody is a leader, because you don't know at what time he will be called upon to do what he has to do. Oh yes, sustainability. When I said sustainability beats heroics, this is what I meant. We love stories of heroism. We celebrate the individual who stays up for 3 nights straight to salvage a broken project. But a sustainable organization cannot be built on individual heroics. Excellence is rarely defeated by competition. It is usually defeated by exhaustion. Look at this logistic pipeline on the slide. It starts with moving supplies, by road from the planes to the base camp, lifting them via helicopters, dropping them at forward dropping zones, carrying them manually over the last mile, and finally sustaining life at the highest frontier. Every single link in the chain must work seamlessly day after day, month after month. And when you look at a successful operation, just don't look at the soldier standing there at the post. Look at the maintenance crew. Look at the logistic support system. Look at all those people who have enabled him to survive in that type of terrain and in that area. As a leader, when your team faces a massive challenge, don't just ask, can we achieve this? Ask the more critical question, can we sustain this? Take care of your logistical pipeline. I mean to say your operational workflows, your resource allocation, your people's mental well-being, because sustainability will always outlast a short burst of brilliance. And now coming down to the last lesson, culture wins when leaders are absent. Okay. This is one of the most important pillars. Leadership is temporary. Commanders change, in your case, CEOs change, your bosses change, managers move on. But the culture stays, the culture wins. How do you know that what your team's culture is? It's dictated by three simple things. What gets tolerated, what gets rewarded, and what gets protected. Look at these images. You see these soldiers. They're celebrating a festival together, sharing a meal in an igloo, standing before a small temple built in the snow in these extreme conditions. We create an environment where standards become an identity. We don't need a supervisor to check if a soldier, has cleaned his weapon or checks his oxygen level. His pride, his sense of ownership and the institutional culture ensures that. When your leaders are absent, what happens to your organization? If the compliance and quality drop the moment the management looks away, you don't have a governance problem, you have a culture problem. High performance teams create a culture that acts as a compass, keeping everyone aligned even when they are completely alone. And one more aspect I would just like to speak on is faith. Faith is a big mover. We all understand that. And how well it's exemplified there. Just short of the snout, there's a small, it's not exactly a temple, it's a place which we called as the OP Baba. No religion, no God, nothing. He's just an OP Baba, is just a sort of a figure of a man. Now, somebody sometime felt that it's this OP Baba who takes care of you. Something divine which holds on to you, which helps you survive, which never lets you down. So over a period of time, everybody has begun to accept it. So before you enter the glacier, the report is given to OP Baba, telling that, listen, I'm moving ahead with my team. Please ensure that we all come back safe and sound. And when you come back after your tenure, you again give a report to him telling that thank you so much. To a layman, it sounds ridiculous. But then, that's faith. And if it helps, why not? So now, let me just conclude. I'll just summarize the 6 pillars, which I had spoken of. In stable times, systems produce results, and any standard management framework can keep a company moving forward when the market is predictable. In difficult times, individual leadership can pull through a temporary crisis. But in truly VUCA times, when the ground beneath your feet is shifting like a moving glacier, you need an integrated ecosystem. You need purpose to create direction, trust to create resilience, discipline to create agility, leadership to create scales, sustainment to create endurance, and culture to create victory. This is how military formations function under the greatest pressures known to humanity. And that's exactly how, I feel that we all need to function. We endure, we overcome, we win. And yes, the armed forces will never fail the nation. And what is the ultimate recognition? You know, when we get back from there, what is a soldier looking for? He's looking for the Siachen medal. This is the ultimate recognition. He just takes it as any other task which he has done. He takes it that, yes, I was entrusted with this task, I've accomplished it, and I'm back. And he wears this medal with a lot of pride. Nothing else he wants. Thank you so much for your patience, Yadav.